Stalag 9B, Bad Orb, Germany, January 1945. 7 men died in their bunks that first night, their eyes bulging from bloodless faces, mouths stretched in silent screams. The guards found scratch marks on the wooden floors, not made by human nails, leading to each corpse. No dog was ever kept at Stalag 9B. I am the War Maestro, and tonight I bring you the classified testimonies of men who learned that in war's darkest prisons, death stalks on 4 legs, choosing its victims with ancient, terrible purpose. In the winter of 1944 to 45, the devastating Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's desperate final offensive in the West, was collapsing. Thousands of frozen, starving Allied soldiers were captured in the snowy Ardennes forest and forced into Germany's overcrowded prison camp system. Among the most notorious was Stalag 9B near Bad Orb, where over 4,000 prisoners were crammed into barracks designed for 2,000, with temperatures plummeting to minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Dysentery, typhus, and frostbite claimed dozens of lives daily. But something else stalked these men, something the official military records would later classify as mass psychogenic illness. The prisoners knew better. Private Malcolm Hensley's fingers trembled, not from the cold, but from fatigue, as he pressed them against the throat of the American soldier. No pulse. The 4th death on his watch tonight. The body on the thin straw mattress was more skeleton than man, skin stretched gray and tight across jutting bones. The dog tags read, PFC Thomas Jenkins, 106th Infantry Division, another Bulge survivor who'd survived German artillery only to die in this frozen hell. Malcolm's breath clouded in the dim light of Barrack 4C, his British medic's armband now a cruel joke when he had nothing but aspirin and dirty bandages to treat hundreds of dying men. The stench was unbearable. Gangrene, excrement, unwashed bodies, and something else beneath it all. Something metallic and ancient that reminded Malcolm of the hunting hounds his grandfather kept. But there were no dogs in Stalag 9B. The Germans had made that perfectly clear. A hand seized Malcolm's wrist. PFC James Whitmore, the man in the next bunk, was supposed to be sleeping after Malcolm had administered the last of their hoarded morphine for his gangrenous foot. Instead, Whitmore was bolt upright, every tendon in his neck straining, eyes fixed on the barracks doorway. It's here again, Whitmore hissed, nails digging crescents into Malcolm's flesh. Right there in the fucking doorway. Malcolm whipped around, the hairs on his neck rising before his conscious mind could suppress the reaction. The doorway stood empty, except for shadows cast by the single authorized light bulb, shadows that seemed to pool and deepen as he watched. The dog. Whitmore's voice cracked, black as pitch with eyes like burning coals. It's staring at me, just like it stared at Reynolds before they found him with his heart burst in his chest. There's nothing there, Malcolm said firmly, though sweat beaded along his collar despite the freezing air. It's the fever, mate, your mind playing tricks. But Malcolm had heard the rumors spreading through the camp like its own contagion. A massive black dog, with eyes that glowed like hot coals, silently stalking the rows of bunks at night. The Germans called it Todeshund, Death's Hound, and the guards now refused to enter the barracks after sunset, simply waiting until morning to collect the night's dead. You don't see it because it's not here for you, Whitmore moaned, voice dropping to a horrified whisper. It doesn't kill, it just marks. It knows who's already dying. Malcolm felt it then, a sudden pressure change in the room, as if something massive had displaced the air. The shadows in the doorway seemed to recede, flowing away like ink in water. Make it stop watching me, Whitmore pleaded, tears freezing on his sunken cheeks. By dawn, Whitmore's body was stiff in his bunk, eyes wide and fixed on the doorway, no medical cause of death apparent. Malcolm noticed dark patches on the wooden floor, marks that looked disturbingly like massive paw prints, visible only until they faded like frost under morning sun. That evening, Malcolm tore a page from a dead man's Bible and found a pencil stub. With trembling hands, he pried loose a floorboard beneath his bunk and began the first entry in what would become his secret journal. January 17, 1945. 5 deaths in Barrack 4C tonight. All reported seeing the black dog before dying. Whitmore described it in detail, massive hound with red eyes. Guards refusing night duty in barracks, leaving bodies until morning. Rational explanation. Mass hysteria from starvation and cold. Alternative theory. Something is hunting in Stalag 9B. Something that leaves no marks except on the mind. Must document everything. If I don't survive, perhaps someone will find this and understand what happened here. As Malcolm pressed the floorboard back into place, the lights flickered briefly throughout the barracks. In that instant of near darkness, he could have sworn he heard the soft click of claws on wood just beneath his bunk, moving with deliberate, patient purpose. By early February, Malcolm's hidden journal had grown thick with entries. Pages torn from dead men's letters, scraps of packaging paper, even toilet tissue, all filled with his increasingly cramped handwriting. The death toll mounted with each passing night, always following the same pattern: sighting of the black dog, followed by death within 24 hours. No exceptions. "You're wasting away, Doc," Sergeant Morris whispered as they huddled near the barracks' lone stove, its meager heat barely reaching them. Morris, a tank commander captured near Bastogne, had become Malcolm's lone confidant. "When's the last time you slept?" Malcolm rubbed his hollowed eyes. He couldn't remember. Every time he closed them, he saw the same image, that shifting darkness in the doorway, watching, selecting. "I'm documenting everything," Malcolm murmured, his voice a rasp. 27 deaths since January 17th. 17 reported seeing the dog before dying. The others, well, they couldn't speak by the time it appeared to them. Morris glanced nervously at the doorway. "Ever notice the Krauts won't come in after dark? They know something. Schmidt told me yesterday they lost 3 guards last month who entered barracks 7 after sunset. Found them with their hearts simply stopped." Malcolm had indeed noticed. The German guards, hardened men who thought nothing of beating prisoners senseless for minor infractions, now posted sentries outside, rather than within the barracks after nightfall. They collected the dead at dawn, eyes averted from the bodies. "There's a Belgian in barracks too," Morris continued, his voice dropping further. "Says in his country they have stories about black dogs that appear at crossroads and battlefields. Death omens. Says they don't kill you themselves. They're just the advance party." Malcolm pulled out his latest page of observations, shielding it from curious eyes with his body. "I've been tracking the intervals," he said. "It's not random. There's a pattern to who it selects and when. The first night was 7 men, then 5, then 3, then 7 again, and the exact same sequence is repeating." Morris paled. "What does that mean?" "It means it's not disease or starvation killing these men," Malcolm answered, a tremor in his voice. "Something is selecting them specifically, counting them out." That night, Malcolm made a fateful decision. He would stay awake all night and see the creature for himself. He positioned himself facing the barracks entrance, determined to document what no one else had clearly seen. As midnight approached, the temperature plummeted further. Men moaned in their fever dreams. The single light bulb cast elongated shadows that seemed to writhe with malevolent purpose. At precisely 1:17 a.m., Malcolm's pencil snapped in his grip. The darkness in the doorway was thickening. Not a shadow cast by something, but a shadow that was something. It pooled like ink, rising and taking form, a massive canine silhouette with shoulders as high as a man's chest, and eyes, 2 glowing pinpricks that burned like banked coals in a forge. It saw Malcolm watching. It knew. Malcolm couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The eyes held him pinned like an insect. Then, the massive head turned deliberately toward a nearby bunk where a young American lay sleeping, Private Cooper, who had been recovering from pneumonia. The creature simply stood, watching, before melting back into the ordinary shadows of the night. In the morning, Cooper was dead, his face locked in an expression of such terror that even the German guards crossed themselves before removing the body. In Malcolm's journal, a new entry appeared, the writing more jagged than before. February 3, 1945. "I saw it. God help me, I saw it. It knows I was watching. It looked at me before it marked Cooper. It knows." The February cold petrified the dead and tormented the living. Malcolm's hands had developed a constant tremor, not from the cold, but from what the guards were calling camp sickness. Sleep deprivation, malnutrition, the slow collapse of the mind. But Malcolm knew better. He'd started seeing the black dog even during daylight hours now, a glimpse of movement at the periphery of his vision, gone when he turned to look. "Herr Doctor, a moment," a voice whispered in accented English. Malcolm turned to find Corporal Weber, one of the few guards who treated prisoners with any humanity. The young German looked gaunt, dark circles ringing his eyes. He gestured Malcolm behind the infirmary shed, away from both prisoner and guard observation. "You've been watching for it," Weber said, his voice barely audible over the wind. "The black one, the death marker." Malcolm felt ice that had nothing to do with the weather. "I don't know what you mean." Weber smiled grimly. "I was a veterinarian before the war. I know dogs. This is not a dog. Not really." He glanced over his shoulder. "My grandfather told stories from the Eastern Front in the Great War. The Russians called it Chernobog's hound. Our men called it other names. It appears when many men die in one place. It feeds on their fear before death." "You've seen it too," Malcolm realized, noting the man's haunted expression. Weber nodded. 3 nights ago, patrolling the fence line. It stood across the compound, watching me. Then it turned and walked through the wall of Barracks 5 as if it were mist. He drew a shuddering breath. "That night, 4 men died in their sleep. Nothing marks a prisoner camp like death, Doctor. It soaks into the ground like blood." Malcolm swallowed. "Why tell me this?" "Because you are documenting it," Weber answered. "I've seen you writing, hiding papers." He pressed something small and hard into Malcolm's palm. "Take this. In my village, iron keeps such things at bay. Not to save those already marked, nothing can do that, but to protect yourself from its gaze." Malcolm looked down at a crude iron nail bent into a circle. "When it looks at you," Weber continued, voice cracking, "it is deciding, but it only takes those already dying. Camp sickness, starvation, frostbite. The dog knows who cannot survive Stalag 9B. It harvests early." That night, Malcolm faced a moral crisis that threatened to shatter his medical ethics. If Weber was right, if the creature only claimed those already dying, did that make it merciful? A release from suffering? Or something far more sinister? He placed the iron circle under his thin mattress and added a new entry to his journal. February 11, 1945. Even the guards know. They've seen it too. Weber claims it only takes the already dying. Mercy or Hunter? Perhaps both. The iron circle seems primitive superstition, but I find myself clutching it when shadows move. Jensen started screaming at 2 a.m., claimed the dog was lying on his chest, crushing him. Found him dead at dawn. No marks, just eyes frozen open in terror. I heard something new tonight. As Jensen died, I could have sworn I heard it. A sound like satisfied swallowing from the darkest corner of the barracks. Are we merely cattle being culled? Or is there purpose to its selection? 3 days later, Weber disappeared from his post. The camp commandant announced he had been transferred. The prisoners in Barracks 5 knew better. They'd heard the screams from the guard quarters that night, and the low, rumbling growl that followed. "It's mass hysteria," Malcolm insisted, his voice hoarse from sleeplessness, as he hunched with Sergeant Morris over a contraband Red Cross report smuggled in by a French prisoner. "It says right here, psychogenic illness documented in multiple camps. We're all starving, freezing, watching men die daily. Of course our minds create monsters." The last week of February had brought temporary respite, fewer deaths, no sightings. Malcolm clung to rationality with desperate fingers, trying to convince himself as much as Morris. The medical part of his brain demanded logical explanations. Does mass hysteria leave paw prints in frost? Morris asked quietly, tapping his tin cup against the frozen floor. Does it make dogs howl outside the wire every night at the same time? Does it kill guards who've seen it? Malcolm's hands trembled as he flipped through his journal entries, now numbering over 50 pages. The human mind is powerful. Hallucinations can seem utterly real. Even shared hallucinations are documented in the psychological literature. Then, "Explain this." Morris said, pulling something from his pocket, a torn scrap of paper with official Wehrmacht letterhead. The English translation scrawled in the margin read, Incident report. Third unexplained guard death at Bad Orb facility. Request immediate transfer of remaining personnel. Local superstition affecting morale. References to Death Hound must be suppressed. Malcolm stared at the paper. Where did you get this? Translated by Peterson before they took him to isolation. He was a codebreaker before capture. Morris said. The guards are terrified, Malcolm. They've requested transfers. 3 guards dead, just like Weber. Malcolm rubbed his sunken eyes. The iron circle Weber had given him now hung on a string around his neck. He hadn't seen the black dog in 8 days. He told himself it was because the superstition was fading, not because the iron was working. There must be a rational explanation, Malcolm repeated, though the words rang hollow even to himself. That night, Malcolm woke gasping from a nightmare. In it, he'd been walking through Stalag 9B, but all the barracks were empty. Snow fell upward from the ground into a black sky. At the center of the compound stood the black dog, massive as a draft horse, its breath steaming in the cold. It had looked at him with eyes that reflected all the suffering of the camp and spoken in a voice like grinding stones. I only take those already claimed by this place. You are documenting what should not be documented. Fully awake now, Malcolm felt something warm on his chest. The iron circle Weber had given him was hot to the touch, almost burning against his skin. In the darkness of the barracks, he heard the soft click of claws on wooden floorboards, circling his bunk but never coming closer than a few feet. The next morning, Malcolm found Sergeant Morris sitting upright in his bunk, staring at nothing, unresponsive. Not dead, just empty. The medical diagnosis would be catatonia from extreme stress. Malcolm knew better. He'd shared too much with Morris, made him a witness to what should have remained undocumented. In his journal, Malcolm wrote with shaking hands. February 28, 1945. It's punishing me for documenting it. First Weber, now Morris. I tried to be scientific, to find rational explanations. But science has no place in Stalag 9B anymore. The black dog is real. It walks between worlds. It harvests those who cannot survive this place, but it resents being watched, being recorded. The iron circle burns at night. It keeps the dog at bay, but for how long? I hear it circling, testing, waiting for the iron's power to fade or my resolve to break. I cannot stop writing. This record must survive, even if I don't. God help me, but sometimes I think I understand its purpose here. In this place of slow, agonizing death, perhaps a quick end is merciful. Perhaps it is a dark angel of a sort. But why does it resent being seen? Under his entry, Malcolm carefully sketched what he'd seen in his nightmare. A black dog with eyes that somehow reflected the faces of all who had died in the camp. Early March brought rumors of Allied forces approaching from the west. The camp guards grew increasingly nervous, burning documents in metal drums that sent greasy smoke spiraling into the gray sky. For the prisoners of Stalag 9B, hope flickered like those distant flames, tantalizing but insubstantial. Malcolm had stopped sleeping entirely. Dark hollows surrounded his eyes, his skin stretched taut over increasingly prominent bones. The other prisoners whispered that he'd contracted camp sickness, but they gave him a wide berth when he stumbled through the barracks. Even dying men shifted away when he approached to offer medical assistance. They could sense it, the invisible mark upon him, the attention of something that had no business existing in their world of barbed wire and hunger. The catatonic Sergeant Morris had been taken to the camp's designated isolation area, where those with contagious diseases or mental breakdowns were left to die quietly, away from the rest of the population. Malcolm knew he would soon join Morris if he couldn't find a way to protect himself. Private Hensley, a voice called quietly as Malcolm stood in the ration line. A skeletal French lieutenant named Dubois beckoned him behind Barracks 3. I heard you've been documenting the visitor, Dubois said, his English precise despite his emaciated condition. I was a folklore professor before the war. There are accounts of similar entities throughout European military history. Malcolm's attention sharpened. What kind of accounts? The British call it the Black Shuck. In France, we have Le Chien Noir. In Northern Europe, the church grim, always associated with battlefields, plague pits, places of mass death. Dubois' sunken eyes held Malcolm's gaze, but the most detailed accounts come from the prisoner camps of the Great War. A Russian prisoner at Totenlager wrote extensively about it before disappearing. What happened to his writings? Malcolm asked, his mouth dry. Confiscated, but not before he drew this. Dubois pulled a folded paper from inside his tattered uniform jacket. On it was a crude drawing identical to what Malcolm had sketched in his journal, a massive black canine with eyes that somehow reflected human faces. It's a psychopomp, Dubois continued, using the word carefully. A guide for the souls of the dying. In normal circumstances, it remains invisible to the living. But in places like Stalag 9B, where the boundary between life and death blurs, it can be perceived. Why does it care if I document it? Malcolm whispered. Dubois' face darkened. Because you're interfering with its purpose. The Russians believe that those who see it and record it are disrupting the natural transition. Like a midwife who photographs birth rather than assisting it, the camera becomes an intrusion. Malcolm felt the iron circle against his chest. It no longer burned at night. Its protection seemingly fading. How do I stop it? You don't, Dubois said simply. You destroy your notes, beg forgiveness, and hope it accepts your penance. The Russian believed it wasn't malevolent, merely performing a necessary function in places where death has become industrialized, mechanized, unnatural. That night, Malcolm sat with his journal open before him, a contraband match ready to burn the pages. His hand trembled over the striking surface. Every instinct as a medic, as a man of science, rebelled against the destruction of evidence, of documentation. The lights throughout the camp flickered, then died completely. In the sudden darkness, Malcolm heard it clearly. The click of nails on wood, the heavy panting breath of something massive, not circling his bunk this time, but standing directly at its foot. He felt the pressure of its gaze like a physical weight pressing him into his thin mattress. The iron circle around his neck grew cold as ice, then shattered with a sound like breaking glass. When the emergency generator restored minimal lighting 3 minutes later, the prisoners found Malcolm gone. His bunk was undisturbed. Only his journal remained, open to a final entry. March 6, 1945. It stands before me now. God help me, its eyes are not eyes at all but windows. I see the faces of all who have died in this accursed place reflected in them. I see what it truly is, not a harbinger or a demon, but a collector, a guide, perhaps even a mercy. I understand now. I was wrong to document, to interfere. Some processes must remain sacred and unseen. If someone finds this record, know that I go willingly. The black dog has come not to claim me, but to show me something. It waits patiently for me to. The entry ended in a single stroke that trailed off the page. Lieutenant Dubois found Malcolm's journal the morning after his disappearance. The French officer recognized the importance of the document immediately, securing it beneath a loose floorboard in Barracks 3 alongside his own secret records. The guards conducted a perfunctory search for the missing British medic, but with Allied forces now reportedly within 50 miles, they had more pressing concerns. 3 days passed with no sign of Malcolm. The atmosphere in Stalag 9B grew increasingly tense as rumors spread that the SS planned to execute prisoners before liberation or force-march them deeper into Germany. The familiar horror of captivity was being replaced by a new fear. What desperate measures might their captors take in the final days of the Reich? On the frigid night of March 9th, Dubois was startled awake by a hand clamping over his mouth. His eyes flew open to find Malcolm Hensley crouched beside his bunk, a finger pressed to his lips in warning. The British medic looked like a walking corpse, skin gray and waxy, eyes sunken and glittering with feverish intensity. "It showed me the way out," Malcolm whispered once Dubois had calmed. "There's a blind spot in the northeast corner." The black dog led me right past the guards. They looked directly at me but didn't see me. I've been hiding in the forest for 3 days. "You escaped?" Dubois asked incredulously, taking in Malcolm's haunted appearance. "Not escaped," Malcolm corrected, his voice strange and distant. "Shown. It showed me what lies on the threshold between worlds. He pulled back his sleeve, revealing forearms covered in strange markings scratched into the skin, crude drawings of what appeared to be massive paw prints interspersed with faces contorted in anguish. "What happened to you?" Dubois breathed, recoiling. "I understand now," Malcolm said, his pupils so dilated his eyes appeared almost black in the dim light. "It's not death that stalks Stalag 9B, it's release. It offers a way out for those who would otherwise suffer longer, and it's shown me how to do the same for others." From his pocket, he withdrew a syringe filled with clear liquid. "What is that?" Dubois asked, pressing back against his bunk. "Morphine, taken from the Commandant's private medical supplies, enough for 20 men to die painlessly." Malcolm's expression was eerily serene. "The dog has chosen them already. I'm merely expediting the process." Dubois lunged for Malcolm's wrist, knocking the syringe aside. "This is madness. You've been out in the cold. You're delirious." Malcolm's face contorted with sudden rage. "You don't understand. I've seen what waits on the other side of the threshold. The black dog isn't evil. It's mercy incarnate." He scrambled for the fallen syringe, but Dubois was faster, despite his weakened state, stomping it beneath his boot. "Guards!" Dubois shouted, forgetting the danger in his desperation. "Help!" Malcolm fled into the darkness between barracks, as searchlights cut through the night, and guards shouted in alarm. Dubois expected gunfire, but none came. It was as if Malcolm had simply vanished into the shadows. The next morning, a grim-faced guard captain announced that a prisoner had been found dead in the latrine, throat torn out by what appeared to be an animal attack. Dubois noticed the guard couldn't meet the prisoner's eyes as he spoke. When asked what kind of animal could enter a secured camp, the captain muttered something about wolves from the forest, then departed quickly. That night, Dubois removed Malcolm's journal from its hiding place and added his own entry. March 10, 1945. Malcolm returned briefly. He believes the black dog is offering mercy to the dying. He intended to help with stolen morphine. I stopped him, but he escaped again. A prisoner died violently last night. Animal attack, they claim. But we all know there are no animals inside the wire. Malcolm's mind has broken. The thing he calls merciful has turned him into its instrument. I fear what comes next. The journal must be preserved as warning. Outside the barracks, the shadows seemed to deepen despite the searchlights. In the darkness, Dubois could have sworn he heard the soft click of claws on frozen ground, circling, waiting, patient as only death can be. On April 2, 1945, the first American tanks breached the perimeter of Stalag 9B. The advancing 44th Infantry Division found a nightmare-made manifest. Over 4 walking skeletons in striped uniforms, many too weak to stand. The camp's German personnel had fled 2 days earlier, leaving the prisoners to fend for themselves. Captain Michael Donovan, a U.S. Army doctor with the Liberation Forces, recorded his first impressions in his field journal. "What we found at Bad Orb defies medical terminology. Men reduced to animate husks. The stench of gangrene, typhus, and dysentery hangs like a miasma. Most disturbing are the psychological cases. Men who stare at nothing. Men who wake screaming about a black dog that comes in the night. Mass delusion resulting from prolonged trauma." The liberators discovered something else, a peculiar epidemic of strange markings throughout the camp. On walls, floors, bunks, even scratched into the skin of the dead and dying, crude drawings of a massive canine figure with eyes that appeared to contain human faces. Lieutenant Dubois sought out the American medical officers immediately, presenting them with Malcolm Hensley's journal and his own supplementary notes. Captain Donovan initially dismissed it as the documentation of a man suffering extreme psychological break, until the night patrols began reporting something stalking the camp perimeter. "Sir, there's something out there," Private Reynolds reported, his face pale beneath his helmet. "Big as a horse, but low to the ground. Eyes like fire." "Did you fire at it, soldier?" the captain demanded. "Yes, sir. Emptied a full clip. It just stood there, watching, then walked away into the trees." In the 3 days following liberation, 16 former prisoners died despite receiving medical attention and nutrition. Each had reported seeing the black dog at their bedside the night before. On the fourth night, Lieutenant Dubois vanished from the recovery tent. A search party found him at dawn, standing at the far edge of the camp beside a pile of freshly turned earth. "He was here," Dubois said when they reached him, his eyes bright. "Malcolm, he was digging." The American soldiers uncovered a makeshift grave containing the bodies of 23 prisoners, all killed by a single morphine injection to the heart. Beneath the bodies lay the remains of 3 German guards, their throats torn out by what the field medic described as massive canine jaws. And at the very bottom, wrapped in a blood-stained Wehrmacht greatcoat, they found Malcolm Hensley. His body was emaciated but unmarked, except for the strange symbols carved into his arms and chest. His eyes were open, his expression one of profound peace. The medical examiner could determine no cause of death. In his final report to military intelligence, Captain Donovan wrote, "The psychological trauma suffered by the prisoners of Stalag 9B manifested in a shared delusion centered around a supernatural entity, a black dog, that allegedly predicted or caused death. One British medical orderly, PVT M. Hensley, appears to have suffered complete psychological collapse, first documenting the phenomenon, then believing himself to be in communication with this entity, and finally committing multiple mercy killings before his own death by undetermined causes. Most disturbing is the continued persistence of this delusion, even after liberation. Men who never spoke to Hensley report identical sightings. The camp dogs refuse to enter certain barracks, and the drawings persist, appearing overnight on previously clean surfaces. Recommendation: full psychological evaluation of all survivors before repatriation. Restricted classification of all documentation related to the Stalag 9B incident. Demolition of all camp structures to eliminate environmental triggers for mass hysteria. Donovan's recommendations were followed. Stalag 9B was razed to the ground in June 1945. The land was reclaimed by the forest. Malcolm's journal, along with Dubois' notes and Donovan's reports, were sealed in British military archives with a 75-year classification. In 1997, during routine digitization of declassified WWII documents, a British archivist discovered the file. The journal was partially damaged, but what remained told a story that defied rational explanation. The archivist filed her report, requesting further investigation. Her request was denied without explanation. 3 nights later, the archivist woke to find a massive shadow at the foot of her bed, a silhouette like a dog but impossibly large, its eyes reflecting faces she didn't recognize. She never spoke of what she saw, but in her personal diary, a final entry was found after her unexpected death from heart failure 2 weeks later. "It came again tonight. It doesn't want to harm me. It simply wants me to understand that some things are not meant to be documented. Some thresholds are not meant to be observed. Death is a private thing, even in war." The dog is still walking in Stalag 9B, though the camp is long gone. It walks wherever many have died badly. It will always walk there. Tonight, I think I will finally follow it to see what it wants to show me. If this tale from the War Maestro's archive left paw prints on your psyche, ensure you're prepared for the next visitation. Check the shadows in your room tonight. Are they deeper than usual? Then subscribe to access more classified military horror. Activate the notification bell. You'll want to know immediately when our next haunted file is declassified. Remember, some journals are still being written, some testimonies still need to be heard, and somewhere, the black dog is still walking.